CSIS 1430 is filmed before a live studio audience.
So here we have on the screen our 5-minute website from today, and we have the Aussie image, which is on the desktop right here. Here's the file that we're looking at right there, and right next to it you can see the Aussie image. And when we open this up in the browser, poof, there's this humongous image of Aussie and the little H1 and H2 tags. Okay. What I want you guys to understand is how file paths work. This is part 1, and part 2 is going to be how the server works. Those two things will solve all of your heartache when it comes to submitting your assignments and understanding how to do them. And even though I'm saying this right now, I'm recording this for posterity and generations to come, I guarantee you one of you will say this to me later, which is okay, but just I want to let you know that I know it's coming. And here's what you'll say. It works on my local computer, on my laptop, but it didn't work when I uploaded it to the server. I'm going to answer that today, and there's 2 reasons that will happen, and pretty much only 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is file paths. Reason number 2 is naming conventions. Okay? First, let's talk file paths. And file paths is a tricky subject, and so I'm going to break it down to a level that maybe a lot of you already understand, but we're taking things back in time a little bit to when this first started happening, all right? So before there was pointy and clicky things, we had the command line, right? And this is important. This is not just me trying to give you a history lesson, all right? So I want you to understand what you're seeing on the screen here. Who's on a Mac? How many Macs we got in the room? 1? Okay. So it's teeny bit different on a Mac, but it's so close that it won't matter. I'll tell you the differences as we go along. So right now you have the C drive, okay? And what this means, the C drive is the physical, actual hard drive in your computer, right? Macs don't have a C drive. They do have a hard drive, obviously. We just call it the root. It's just a slash, right? Just a little backslash, okay? All right, you have the C drive, and the reason it's called the C drive is because A and B were already taken, right? Back in the day, you guys know what a floppy disk is? You've heard that, or you've seen the little save icon on most of your like Word, that little picture. That's actually of what's called a floppy disk. And you might even remember the little 3-inch discs that were kind of plasticky. But the reason those were called floppy disks was because in the 70s and 80s, they were a big 8-inch disc that was floppy, like very paper-like, right? Okay, so we had A drive was a floppy disk, and then we had the B drive, which was maybe a second floppy disk. Nobody had C drives. You didn't have hard drives in your computers back then. Everything was on the floppy disks. Well, eventually when they built hard drives and they physically put them in the computer, then we said, oh, we need another drive, C. That's why your CD-ROMs, if you have those anymore, are called the E drive, because A, B, C, or the D drive, the D and the E drive, because A, B, and C are already taken. That's why when you work at a company where they make you save to their network, it's the F drive, because they reserve A through E for your floppy disks and your hard drive and your all this stuff, right? All right, but this means C means the hard drive, like all the way to the very like raw hard drive. Then on the hard drive, there's a folder called users, right? And then inside of the folder called users is a folder called JStone 54. Now, you guys know, and I think I mentioned this the other day, that if you open up Windows, let's take a look in the Windows Explorer here, and you click on here, we're going to go into the C drive, and what do you see? You see this little icon, looks like a folder, like a file folder, right? Those are actually called directories, right? Back in the day, and if you look here in the command line, and I type dir for directory, it will show me what's in there, and you'll notice that it shows a directory called contacts. You guys would call it a folder, but it's actually called a directory. The reason for that is back in the days when you explained to people how computers worked when they looked like these green screens here, and they didn't look like they do now, you would try to say, okay, a filing system on a computer, it's kind of like the filing cabinet in the corner. Think of the filing cabinet as your hard drive. Think of inside the drawers as little sectors on the hard drive, and inside the sectors you have a folder, and that's a directory on the computer, and inside the directory, what do you have? You have files, right? And so that terminology just stuck, and when we got to this graphical version that we live in this world today, this held true and it stayed the same. But that's why also, so if I go here to, I don't know, let's check out Windows. you can see these little files here. It's hard to see, but they look like a little piece of paper with a folded corner. Well, it's because it's a paper file like you'd see in a filing cabinet back before computers were as ubiquitous as they are today. Okay, so directories. If I want to get into one of these directories in the command line, and by the way, I'm not going to ever test you on command line stuff, so don't try to memorize any of these commands. But if I wanted to, I can go, say I want to get into the music folder. I can say CD for change directory, music. Now notice my file path has changed. My path is now the hard drive, and on a Mac, if you did something like this, it would not have the C there, but it would just have a slash. Everything else would be the same. User, JStone, music, and then again, if I want to see what's in music, let's look down here, and there's nothing in music. Okay, let's say I want to back out. Well, I can say CD ... That actually means go back. And in fact, if you look right here in the list of things that are inside of music, what do you see right here? You see a ... And that's actually a directory. What directory is it? It's the one before music, JStone. So if I say CD ... it goes back to JStone. I can do that again. It takes me back to user. I can do that again. I'm now on the root, just on the hard drive. All right. So those slashes are there just to separate the different folders or the directories. Okay. All right. So let's go back to where we were, and we're going to change directory to users / JStone 54, and we'll go to desktop. And if I do a directory listing here, you'll see that there's that stuff on my desktop, the Aussie HTML, the Aussie JPEG, the picture 1 and 2. And the file path for, say, Aussie is this, right here. That file path I just copied, I could stick it right here, like so. And this will work. This will work just fine, because this file, I'm saying, hey, go to the C drive, go into the users folder, go to JStone 54, go to desktop, and look, there's a file that's going to be called Aussie. So watch when I refresh the page. Here we go. Refresh, and it still works. Okay? Now, let me put this here. There are 2 calls to that image right now. And if I refresh, oh, that's weird how his hand blends together in the middle there. That's kind of trippy. All right, now, this is the first part of what's going to screw you up on it worked locally, but it didn't work remotely. All right, you ready? It's called file paths. And there are 2 types of file paths. There are relative file paths, and there are absolute file paths. And you are looking at both of them right here. Which one do you suppose is absolute, and which one do you suppose is relative? Yeah, absolute is line 9. That is the absolute full path. I can tell any person, if you will, on my computer, in my little people inside your computer that makes things work, right? The little trolls or whatever in your computer, okay? I could tell any of them, hey, go to the C drive. So like, okay, that's the hard drive. That's like the very raw root of the hard drive, okay? And then I say, look in the users folder, and they go, okay, I'm there. Now in there, you'll see a folder called JStone 54. Look in there. Yeah, I see it. Okay, now in your folder, look for one called desktop. Yep, I see it. And in there, you'll find a file called aussie.jpg. Yep, I found it. Easy. Okay, that's an absolute file path. This one is a relative file path. Relative to what? It's relative to the person I'm talking to. In this case, these are people are metaphors, right? The people are little dudes in your computer or whatever. But who am I talking to? The actual HTML file. So I'm saying, hey, HTML file, I, the programmer, command you on line 10 to look wherever you are, and you will see a file called aussie.jpg. And sure enough, HTML looks right here where it is, and it finds a file called aussie.jpg, okay? Think of a file path relative versus absolute this way. All of you guys are sitting at a table here right now, and I want you to imagine that there's actually a desk drawer. There's not, none of these tables have drawers, but imagine we all have a drawer. In my drawer is my keys, right? Or my wallet or whatever. And if you were to ask me right now, where are your keys, Jeff? I would say they're in the top right drawer of this desk, right? Now, if I were to say to you, Julian, where are Jeff's keys? And you said they're in the top right drawer of this desk, pointing to the desk you're sitting at, that would not be true. It's relative to where I'm sitting, right? So if I said to you, If I told any of you, hey, my keys are in the top right drawer. The top right drawer of what, Jeff? Your drawer, my drawer, some drawer in another building? What drawer are you talking about? But if you're sitting at my desk, I say, look, go in my office, sit down at my desk, and then the keys will be in the top right drawer. Well, that's the absolute file path. You got to go to my office first, then you got to sit down at my desk, right? That's what's happening here. Wherever that is right there, is I'm saying go to my office, sit down at my desk, look in the top right drawer, and you'll find the keys, right? That's what I'm saying there. This one, you're already at the desk. I don't have to tell you anything. You're already sitting there. I already know you're there. I'm like, just look in the drawer. Okay, does that make sense, the difference between those two? Okay? What questions do we have about that? Okay, now, why does all this stuff matter? Let's put this in a folder. We'll call the folder Aussie Project. And let's move all this stuff in here. And I'm actually going to move the folder completely. I'm going to put it in my Salt Lake City folder that's in Dropbox, and I'm going to put our Salt Lake Community College, and then I'm going to put it inside of 1430 here. Here we got our project in here. Right now, now that it's not on my desktop anymore, it's going to close out of Notepad, so that's fine. I'm going to reopen it, and then we'll go back to my question. So Aussie Project. So right now, this still works, right? Because I'm still saying, hey, wherever you are, which happens to be in this, I don't know, 10 files deep, right? 10 folders deep. It's right here, wherever that is, okay? That's where the index or the aussie.html file is. Wherever you are, there should be an aussie.jpg right next to you. And sure enough, it's still there, right? Okay, and to prove this, that it still works, let's go run it in the browser. And there you go. Now, one of them's broken. Why is it broken? Yeah, it's no longer in this long file path right here. Okay? Instead, it's now in this file path here. But notice that the relative one did work. That's an important concept we're going to get back to in a minute. This should fix that, though. Why does this matter? If I put that folder, the Aussie project folder, on a thumb drive, and I gave it to you, Tucker, and you put it on your laptop, and then you opened it up, one of those images would work and one of them would not. Right? Which one would work? The relative one that says Aussie, because wherever on your hard drive you put that thumb drive worth of folders, wherever it is, the HTML and the JPEG are in the same place. However many folders level, if it's 30 folders deep into your hard drive somewhere, it doesn't matter, they're all still in the same place. So when I tell the HTML file, look where you are, you'll find Aussie, and you will. But when I tell your computer to say, hey, look in your users folder, which you do have, look for one called JStone54, which you do not have. And so that first image will fail. Why do we care about that? Because if you upload this to your server with an absolute file path in it, what happens? It won't work. The image will not display. But yet it works locally, but it didn't work when I uploaded it to my server. Right? That's one of the times where that will happen. Line 9 will work locally, but it will not work on your server because your server is a Linux box. Everybody in this room is using a Linux box. Okay? Linux doesn't even have a C drive, right? Linux machines are like Macs with the slash. They just have a root, number one. Number two, even if it did have a C drive, Linux machines don't have a users folder. They have a USR folder. Even if they did, they probably don't have a JStone54. They probably don't have this exact file path. But I can take this folder, this one over here, called the Aussie project, and I can put it anywhere on my server I want. Forget about the fact that we're talking about websites for the moment. It's just another computer, right? Just think of it that way. I can put that on anywhere on the server I want to, and I can go and run that HTML page, and line 9 will run just fine. Or sorry, line 10 will run just fine. But line 9 will not, because it's an absolute file path. Yeah, so the question is, what happens if I delete that image? So let's go here and let's delete it. Let's go to the Aussie project. And I'm going to rename it. Well, I'll delete it. It's fine. I'll put it back later. Okay, so now this line of code, line 10, says, hey, look wherever you are, which is right here, and you'll find a file called aussie.jpg. Line 9 says, hey, go to C, go to users, blah, 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 and you will find this. Well, 3 seconds ago, that was true for both line 10 and 9. But now, it's going there to look, and it's like, dude, you said there's an image there, but I'm not seeing it. So you get a broken image, right, for that situation. So let's go put it back. So if you delete an image off of your server or out of the file path, then if your code's pointing to an image that's not there, it'll give you a broken image, okay? Which, that's all that's happening before. Remember earlier when I still had it pointing to my desktop? That's why I got the broken image, because it looked on the desktop and it wasn't there, right? It's the same thing as deleting it, okay? All right, we're gonna take a tangent from that for just a minute, which will lead us into the other thing that causes people to say, hey, it worked on my local machine, but it didn't work when I uploaded it. Why? Okay? Your laptop, it's just a computer, right? It has a file structure on it. Your server is just a computer that has a file structure on it, okay? Your local machine has C:user/ mine has JStone, yours has your name, whatever, / whatever, whatever. Well, the server has a whole bunch of stuff. It has an htdocs folder, and it has a bunch of other stuff. And all of your projects, and we'll see this in a nice little visual PowerPoint thing in a few minutes, but all of your documents, when you're done, you put them on your thumb drive, then you drive to California where your server is, right? And you go knock on the door of the server hosting company and say, hey, can I get access to my server and put these files on there? Of course you don't do that. You use FileZilla, right, to drag it across the internet, so you don't have to make the trip to California or wherever your server is, right? So you're going to take this folder called Aussie Project, and you're going to drag it up to your server. And in fact, I'm going to do that right now with my server. Now my server is right here, and it's called Stone Cold Professor. Let's look at the page here, the actual live site. Not my server, but my site is called that. That's what I meant to say. There is Stone Cold Professor right there, right? So I'm going to, on the root of my computer, or my server, I'm going to drag this Aussie project up there. Where are you at? Aussie project, right there. Now, what I've done is the following. If you take a look here, your servers have a folder called htdocs, okay? My server does not. It has one called public_HTML, and you can see it right there. It's the same thing, okay? What is that thing? We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's the same as your htdocs is my public HTML. They're the same thing, okay? Here's what happens. Right now, when I go to Stone Cold Professor, I also own Stone Cold Magic, so feel free to go there if you want. When you go to Stone Cold Professor right here, what this is saying is it's literally saying, hey, browser, go to here. I'm going to use htdocs because that's what you guys have. Okay? And somewhere in htdocs, I just added a folder that's called Aussie Project or whatever. So you can't put that in a browser, right? Because what does that, I mean, that doesn't do anything. It just goes off to some, whatever, like you're Googling it. You can't put that in a browser, right? Because how does it know which computer you're talking about, right? So the way servers work is that server specifically has been taught through settings and, things that you guys did when you set your servers up that you don't even know you did it, but you did it. You told your server, hey, if somebody types Stone Cold Professor or whatever your site is, that means go to the htdocs folder, okay? So when somebody types in Stone Cold Professor, they're literally looking in htdocs. That's where they're going. Now, I have my server set up to be slightly different, and it goes into htdocs or public HTML and into a folder called websites, which you can see right there, into another folder called this. I'm not going to say any more of the names out loud because I'm going to blur this out for security. But you can see it's multiple levels deep, right? Do you see that, how it's multiple levels deep? So I'm going to put a fake file path here, htdocs. So I have my server trained, if you will, that if somebody types in Stone Cold Professor, it means go to that file path. Does that make sense? You guys have yours trained. If somebody types in your website .freehost.vip or whatever, you have yours trained to just go there. That's it. It just goes to htdocs. All right, I've set mine up a little differently, but for this class, you guys just go right to htdocs. Now, also, I did mention mine's not called htdocs, it's called public HTML, but it's the same thing. All right. The real message of the day, folks, is that is the root of your hard drive. Okay. Now, what happens right now if I look on any old computer and I open up, I click on a folder right here, like 2018, I click on that folder, what am I seeing? Just seeing the folders and files that are inside the folder, right? So if I were to go to the server and I go to htdocs, what would I see? I would literally see the folders and files that are in your server. In fact, I'm going to show you that. I'm going to break my website on purpose, just for your entertainment and education. So here we go. I go to Stone Cold Professor and this is going right to that file path I showed you on the screen a minute ago. And look what it does. It's just listing the folders. It's just listing what's in the directory. You can see, I'm not going to read these names out loud, okay, but I'm going to point out to you the first name, read it there at the top of the screen. And then over here in my FTP, you can see it right there. Okay? Again, I'm going to blur this out for security reasons. Okay? But then the second one here, you can see the second one that's been clicked on. And sure enough, there it is. That's just the folder that's in there. So looking at each one of these, I'm just looking at all the files that are inside of that directory. Well, that's a security issue. If somebody goes to your website and they can see all these files, like this one right here is PHP code. That might have passwords and all kinds of stuff in it. That's no good. So what you want to do is have a default file that if somebody looks in your folder, it goes to this default file. And for Linux servers, that default file is called index.html or index.php. Both of those will work. Okay? So that's why I renamed my index file a second ago so it would disappear. Now the index file is back to being named index, and I refresh, and behold, it now displays this. Let's take a breather. What happens here is this. If you're sitting at the server, like you're in the same room as the server and you have a keyboard and a mouse hooked up to it, it's just like your laptop. You're just clicking around and looking at the folders. If, however, you try to access the folders through a browser, you can't go C:\whatever in a browser, right? Or just slash whatever on the browser. So if you want to get access to the folders on the server, the web server, you have to type in the name of the URL. You type in the name of the URL, and its job is to go to the htdocs folder. Then it looks in the htdocs folder and goes, okay, is there an index in here? No? All right, I'll just show you the contents of the folder. Oh, there is an index? Okay, then I'll run the index file. That make sense? Okay, how do we feel about that idea? Now, we uploaded a thing called Aussie Project a second ago, and it's, again, I've changed these names to protect the innocent.
Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Here, that's not what the folders are called on my server. There's something else, okay? But it's whatever, and then /Aussie. Well, remember, this is just Stone Cold Professor. So if I want to get to the Aussie Project, what could I type in the browser? /Aussie Project, right? So I go Aussie Project. Now, when I type that, there is no index in that folder. So what's it going to do? It's going to display the files in the folders, right? It's just going to display Aussie and Aussie.html and Aussie.jpg, because that's all that's in there. There is no index file in there, right? Because there's no index, it just displays what's in the folder. It's no different than if I'm sitting here on my machine and I actually click on the Aussie project, and when I click on the Aussie project, it just shows the folders there, the two files there. It's exactly the same thing. Now, if there's an index file there, then things change. If I rename the Aussie.html to index, then it would display the actual web code instead of this little list of folders and files. Make sense? Yeah, the question was, can I change that to index so we can see? So before I do, I want to show you, if I wanted to see that Aussie file as an actual web page, I just aussie.html. That's the file path, right? Agreed? There it is. Now remember, one of them is broken because it had that absolute file path in it, right? Okay. But that's it. That's how I get there. Now, let's rename it. Like you said, we'll rename it to index. So I'll come over here and in my Aussie project here, and I'll just rename it to index. Okay. So now this Aussie file, if I refresh, it's gone. Right? It doesn't exist. But there is one called index, which is that. But what I told you a minute ago was that if you go to any folder on the web without specifying a file, it just goes to the default file, which is index. And so I did not specify a file, so it went to index. Right? So if I specified a file, it would go to that file. So for example, let's go back to Stone Cold Professor. Right now, Stone Cold Professor, I didn't specify a file, I just specified a folder. Which folder? htdocs/whatever/whatever/whatever. It's that folder. Your guys' is just htdocs. Okay, so I didn't specify a file though. So it looks for my index.php file, and that's what this content is. If, however, I specified that specific file index.php, nothing changes. Because that is what was already displaying, because that is the default, because I didn't specify a file. Make sense? Now, if I wanted to, I know some other files that are in this folder, so I can say, I've got one called sudoku.php, and I'm specifying that file. So it does not go to index anymore. It goes to the one I told it to go to, which is sudoku, which I spelled wrong. I forgot the PHP at the end there. Sorry about that. Right, and it goes there, because I told it to. Don't worry about what this is for my discrete math class, okay? But point is, I can go to a specific file if I want to. But if I don't choose a specific file, poof, I go to the index page. I know this, maybe I'm beating a dead horse here, but you've got to understand this idea, because without this understanding of file paths and how do I navigate to, how do I look at files on another computer and all this stuff, you'll never be able to fully get your head around web development, okay? All right, last thing I want to tell you about this, then we're going to change gears. Not all servers use index as their default. That's what Linux uses, right? Now you can change it. You can go into Linux and Apache settings and change it to make it to where the default folder file is called Beavis. Okay, but some systems, Windows in particular, they don't use index. They use a file called default. They're not running PHP. They're not looking for a PHP thing or an HTML thing. They're looking for .asp. So they have one called default. So here's a site that we know, W3 Schools. This is actually built and hosted on a Windows server, okay? Not a PHP, not a Linux server. And because of that, their default file, when you look in a folder, is called default.asp. So if I put /default.asp, it just stays where it's at, because that's the content it was already displaying, because I hadn't specified a specific folder or file. All right, have I beaten this one to death? File paths, how do we feel? So the question was, is the index your home screen? No, the index is a file that has web content in it. It's just a web page that has content in it. It just so happens to be that the web page that your browser will show if they don't specifically ask for a specific location. So, for example, let's go back to Stone Cold Professor here. There's other things on here, like for example, if I go to the database programming and I click on the database video playlist, that takes me to another file that's just in htdocs. And that file is called db-videos.php. It just takes me to that file. If I already know that path, right, I can just, let's open it up in another browser. I can just type that path, and what's it do? It just goes directly there. If I did not say go directly to that specific file, it's the same thing as saying just go to the index then, go to that file, right? Just go there. If I don't specify. Not specifying and saying index are the same thing. They both go to index, right? So in my case, I made, Obviously, if I'm giving out business cards with my website on it called Stone Cold Professor, I don't want them to say, yeah, go to stonecoldprofessor.com/db-videos.php. That's ridiculous, right? Or I don't even want them to say, go to stonecoldprofessor.com/index.php. I don't even want them doing that. I want them going just to Stone Cold Professor. And so the way servers are set up, that just means go to that folder, which is htdocs, and find the default, right? Which is why, by the way, all of your assignments, I dock points if you don't submit the exact URL I tell you to submit, right? So let's take the one that's coming up next Sunday called Tables. If you don't, like whatever your site is, mine's Stone Cold Professor, so you're supposed to put stonecoldprofessor.com/tables or whatever your name is, /tables. If you put /tables/index.php, it goes to the same place, but it's not the URL I want you to submit it, and you will lose the points for that. The reason why is because that very thing I mentioned a minute ago. Your business card, you don't want the wrong URL on it. You don't want a more complicated URL. You don't want the company you work for to say, hey, what's the URL of the site so we can put it on a brochure or whatever, and you don't want to give them that long, ugly URL. You want to give them the correct URL, okay? So that's why I dock your points if you goof that up. All right, other thoughts, questions, comments?